With the first pick, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Karl Anthony Towns.
The 2015 NBA draft class stands out for one big reason. Outside of Karl Anthony Towns, almost nobody hit the ground running. Towns, the first overall pick, was the only player who looked like a star from the jump, the kind of talent you could tell right away was built for a long, successful career. Everyone else around him got off to a noticeably slower start. In fact, when Towns won Rookie of the Year, he became just the fifth rookie in NBA history to win the award unanimously, sweeping every single vote, and that wasn't always expected. There was actually a stretch leading up to the draft when the conversation was essentially a two-man race between Towns and Jahlil Okafor, two standout freshman big men who dominated college basketball in completely different styles. Okafor was viewed as a classic back-to-the-basket center, while Towns was seen as a much better fit for the faster, more modern direction the NBA was heading in. With the three-point shot rapidly reshaping the league, Towns had the skill set that fit where basketball was going, not where it had been. The bigger story, though, is that this draft class was supposed to be loaded with star power. Multiple players were projected to become franchise cornerstones, but as careers played out, an alarming number of them flamed out before ever reaching their prime, turning this into one of the most disappointing draft classes of the modern NBA era. Let's break down exactly what happened. While Karl Anthony Towns ended up with by far the most accolades and team success of the group, his road wasn't smooth either. For much of his time in Minnesota, he took heavy criticism, whether it was about his effort level, his tendency to disappear in tough moments, or his defense, which was ironically supposed to be his calling card coming into the league. One pre-draft scouting report actually predicted that defense would be his strongest asset right away. That projection was largely built around comparisons to Andrew Bogut, a label that, in hindsight, turned out to be wildly off base. Towns had led the entire NCAA in individual defensive rating, yet his Minnesota teams ranked among the worst defenses in basketball nearly every season he played there, until Rudy Gobert arrived. Towns has always thrived most as a secondary piece, someone whose passing, rebounding, and shooting complement a true number one option. His best seasons have consistently come when he's playing alongside an elite guard, someone who lets him lean into his strengths while focusing more on defense than scoring. All things considered, he met and arguably exceeded expectations. Unfortunately, after Towns, the rest of the lottery told a much rougher story. D'Angelo Russell, taken second overall, was billed as a future superstar thanks to his elite scoring and playmaking ability. As a left-handed, highly creative ball handler, he drew comparisons to players like James Harden and Manu Ginobili. But within his first couple of seasons, the cracks started showing. The thing separating him from those two legends wasn't talent, it was basketball IQ. Russell's feel for the game, his ability to read defenses and make the right read in real time, just never fully developed. Defensively, he was a major liability. The hope was always that this would improve with experience, and every so often he'd flash scoring potential that made teams believe he could sustain it. He never could. That's a big reason he was traded 6 separate times across his first 11 seasons. Teams kept acquiring him, hoping for a breakthrough, only to realize his limitations were too deep to fix, then moving him along. For a second overall pick to spend his entire career bouncing between teams isn't a success story, no matter how the box score numbers look. His real shortcoming was his impact on winning, which never matched the hype. At number 3, Jahlil Okafor. There was speculation he might have ended up in Los Angeles instead of Russell, but realistically, it wouldn't have mattered much either way. Both struggled in the NBA. Okafor's decline came even faster because the exact skills that made him dominant in college quickly became outdated at the pro level. By 2015, the league was shifting hard toward pace and space, with the Golden State Warriors becoming the blueprint every team wanted to copy. Okafor simply didn't have the tools to adapt to that new style. His pre-draft comparison was Al Jefferson, a player who built a long career averaging around 20 points and 10 rebounds a night. But there were two key differences. First, Jefferson played in an era where his skill set still had real value, even as it gradually became less effective. Second, Okafor's issues went beyond him. He often looked disengaged on the court. Even when his game was already limited to one dimension, his lack of urgency made it that much worse. You didn't need advanced stats to see it. Watching even one game from his rookie year made it obvious how little urgency he played with. The only time he really turned it on was when he got the ball in the post and ran one of his signature post moves, and even then, he struggled badly whenever he didn't have a clear size advantage. The league was also moving away from slow-footed centers, and calling Okafor slow-footed honestly undersells it. He looked like he was wading through wet cement out there. His rookie year wasn't great, but it ended up being the best season of his career, and by age 25, he was out of the league. He did technically resurface briefly with the Indiana Pacers years later, but it's a stretch to even call that a real comeback.
The fourth pick, Kristaps Porzingis. I actually covered him in a previous video about the biggest what-if talents in NBA history. Porzingis was essentially viewed as a Victor Wembanyama-type prospect before Wembanyama ever entered the league conversation. A 7'3" unicorn with the tools to become the next transcendent superstar. No player since Ralph Sampson had come in with that kind of size, paired with such a diverse offensive skill set and elite defensive upside. But just like Sampson, injuries became the defining obstacle of his career. By his third season, the same year he made his first All-Star team, his career trajectory shifted after he tore his ACL. He eventually recovered and spent several productive years as a strong complementary piece, but availability became a recurring issue. It's part of why, even after helping Boston win a championship, the team ultimately moved on from him rather than commit to a long-term, expensive deal. His career has clearly outpaced D'Angelo Russell's, but it didn't unfold the way most people originally envisioned either. Porzingis looked like franchise superstar material on paper, but ultimately carved out a successful niche as a strong third option instead. The fifth pick, Mario Hezonja. This is where things really start drifting into bust territory. He came in as an exceptionally versatile 6'8" wing with a strong frame, someone who looked capable of doing a little bit of everything. But that's often the trap with players like him. A wing projected to be solid across the board frequently ends up struggling across the board once they reach the NBA, the classic jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none outcome. Hezonja was always a boom-or-bust gamble, since after the top 4 picks were off the board, the rest of the lottery was largely a coin flip anyway. His ceiling looked sky-high, but his floor was rock-bottom. Unfortunately for the Orlando Magic, this one landed firmly on the bust side. By age 25, he was already out of the league. Pick 6, Willie Cauley-Stein, the 4th center taken within the first 6 selections, which is already a wild number on its own. Unlike the other bigs in this class, though, Cauley-Stein was viewed as much more defensively focused. Standing 7 feet tall and around 240 pounds, his closest comparison was Tyson Chandler, and that made sense on paper. Before the draft, Larry Bird reportedly met with him and told him he believed he could become a $100 million player, a comment that genuinely caught Cauley-Stein off guard. But replicating Chandler's impact, protecting the rim, finishing lobs, and crashing the boards requires a relentless, every-night motor, and Cauley-Stein's effort level fluctuated from game to game. He also seemed to believe he deserved a bigger offensive role at times, rather than fully committing to the specific job Sacramento needed from him. The Kings' confidence in him eroded steadily by his 4th season. They initially extended him a qualifying offer to retain his restricted free agency rights, but later rescinded it, effectively signaling they'd moved on. And it wasn't just Sacramento. Around the league, he never carved out a defined enough role to stick anywhere long-term. By age 28, his NBA run was over. Pick 7, Emmanuel Mudiay. Coming out of high school, he was actually ranked the #1 player in the entire country and had committed to SMU. He never enrolled there, though. Instead, he became the first top prospect to skip college entirely and play professionally in China. It sounded like an unusual decision at the time, but given the circumstances, it made sense. During his 2 years at Prime Prep Academy in Texas, there were serious concerns about his college eligibility.
According to the Texas Education Agency, the school was facing closure for failing to meet state education requirements, and at one point was reportedly under an extended review to determine whether it even met NCAA academic standards. With his college path in jeopardy, Mudiay wanted to avoid that uncertainty altogether. He'd also grown up facing real hardship, born during the Second Congo War and losing his father when he was still a toddler, and he wanted to start providing for himself and his family as soon as possible. So he signed a reported one-year, roughly $1.2 million deal with the Guangdong Tigers. His draft stock didn't drop much heading into the NBA, though it's fair to wonder whether a year of college might have helped his development. We'll never really know. Either way, his rookie season was rough enough that the Nuggets lost confidence in him almost immediately, leading them to draft another point guard the very next year, Jamal Murray. The two battled for minutes, but Mudiay was fighting a losing battle. He was an explosive athlete at the point guard position, drawing comparisons to players like Derrick Rose or Russell Westbrook, but his shooting was a major weakness. Among players taking at least 10 shots a game in his first 2 seasons, he ranked last in efficiency. Ultimately, the Nuggets needed a guard who fit alongside Nikola Jokic, and Murray's chemistry with Jokic was simply far stronger. Mudiay was soon traded out of Denver and not long after out of the league entirely. As a Knicks fan myself, I remember his stint in New York actually being pretty solid. His 2018-19 season turned out to be the best of his career, but the timing worked against him. With the stacked 2019 free agent class on the horizon, names like Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Kyrie Irving, Kemba Walker, and Jimmy Butler, the Knicks chose to preserve cap space instead of committing long-term to Mudiay, hoping to land one of those bigger names instead. Knowing the Knicks' history, almost any other year they likely would have re-signed him. So strangely, the timing might have actually worked in his favor long-term. By age 25, he was out of the league.
Pick 8. Stanley Johnson. He was originally projected as a future defensive anchor, someone in the mold of Ron Artest, given his size and frame. Unfortunately, his offensive game basically never materialized. He had an imposing build, 6'6" and around 240 pounds, and that physicality overwhelmed opponents in college. But beyond that, his skill set was limited. Even finishing layups at the rim was a struggle despite his size. In some seasons, he missed roughly half his attempts around the basket. It wasn't a lack of effort, he simply didn't have the instincts or foot speed of elite NBA defenders, nor the shooting touch to compensate. By age 26, he was out of the league. Pick 9. Frank Kaminsky. This was during the era when Michael Jordan owned the Charlotte Hornets and seemed to have a clear preference for tall, skilled big men. This selection came just 2 years after Charlotte used the 4th overall pick on Cody Zeller. Neither pick ended up becoming the franchise center Jordan was hoping for. Throughout his career, Kaminsky was one of the worst rebounding 7-footers you'll ever see. He was a genuinely solid 3-point shooter, and there's real value in a 7-footer who can stretch the floor. Think of someone like Channing Frye, who carved out a long career doing exactly that. The issue is that Kaminsky never offered much beyond the shooting, none of the traditional value teams expect from a player his size. That remained true right up until he exited the league at age 29. Pick 10. Justice Winslow. This is the textbook definition of a draft day trap. His outstanding NCAA tournament run significantly boosted his stock, and even early in his Miami career, there were flashes that made people believe stardom was inevitable. His defense and high-effort style made him an instant fan favorite as a rookie. He genuinely embodied the identity of Heat culture. With elite physical tools, strong two-way potential, and a developing offensive game, his ceiling looked enormous if he could keep building on what he showed in that tournament run. Then, in his second season, a torn labrum required shoulder surgery, a brutal setback for a player who was still developing as a shooter. Every time he returned, he'd add something new to his game, but the injuries kept piling up. His knees, his back, and eventually hip replacement surgery, which derailed any real momentum. By age 26, in what turned out to be his final NBA season with Portland, he was a shell of the player he once looked like becoming. That makes 6 straight players, picks 5 through 10, who fell out of the league before ever reaching their prime. The back half of the lottery fared noticeably better, though. Miles Turner at pick 11 was a smart selection, since Indiana was already moving on from the Roy Hibbert and David West frontcourt era. Turner's game fit the modern center mold perfectly, someone who could thrive in pick-and-roll situations, both rolling to the rim and popping for threes, while also serving as a genuinely strong rim protector with good footwork and positioning. His main weakness has been struggling against more traditional physical post-up centers. Players like Embiid or Nikola Jokic have routinely posted big numbers against him, which fed into a reputation for being soft in the paint, something his rebounding numbers tend to reflect. Still, when you think of a true 3-and-D center, Turner is one of the first names that comes to mind, and for most of his career, he's filled that role effectively. Pick 12, Trey Lyles. Originally projected as a smaller, more perimeter-oriented version of Miles Turner, a 3-and-D power forward with what was supposed to be a more refined face-up game. That part of his game never really developed, so teams mostly used him as a floor-spacing three-point shooter instead. Even so, Lyles managed to stick around the league for 10 seasons, longer than most of this class's top picks. Pick 13, Devin Booker. Arguably the second-best player to come out of this entire draft, behind only Karl Anthony Towns. Despite Booker consistently playing at an elite level, the roster around him has been inconsistent year after year. He came agonizingly close to a championship in 2021, but getting back to that level proved difficult. As Booker entered his prime, Phoenix tried to fast-track a championship roster by trading for a high-usage star in Kevin Durant and absorbing a heavy contract in Bradley Beal. That kind of aggressive move is always a gamble, and in this case, most of the likely outcomes leaned unfavorable. The Suns gave up significant draft capital in the process, several unprotected first-round picks for Durant and additional first-round pick swaps for Beal, setting the franchise back in terms of future flexibility. Booker still has a realistic shot at winning a title down the line, though probably not as the clear first option, and possibly not in Phoenix.
And the final lottery pick, Cameron Payne. Once known mostly for an awkward-looking jump shot early in his career, Payne has spent more than a decade carving out a role as a reliable backup point guard. It's almost funny looking back at how little was expected of him early on, yet his career has outlasted several players drafted well ahead of him. That covers all 14 lottery selections, but a handful of other first-round names are worth mentioning too. Kelly Oubre Jr. and Terry Rozier, picked just outside the lottery, both carved out meaningful careers as role players on playoff teams. Bobby Portis, taken 22nd, became the sixth man on a championship-winning Milwaukee team. Tyus Jones, picked 24th, built a reputation as one of the league's most reliable assist-to-turnover guards. Larry Nance Jr. and Kevon Looney closed out the first round, both turning into long-tenured elite role players, Looney especially. He ended up being one of the biggest steals of the entire class, massively outperforming his draft slot in Golden State. Watching him play, you'd never guess he's an undersized center at 6'9". He simply plays much bigger than his listed height. The second round of this draft wasn't flashy overall, but it produced a surprising number of players who outperformed expectations. Norman Powell, selected 46th overall, turned into a long-tenured NBA scorer across 4 different franchises, and whenever given the opportunity, a legitimate 20-point-a-game threat. He's actually averaged close to 20 points a game across stints with 4 separate teams, including a recent first career All-Star selection with the Miami Heat. Outside of him, this class also produced former 6th Man of the Year Montrezl Harrell at pick 33, 10-year veterans Josh Richardson and Richaun Holmes, and Cedi Osman, who became one of LeBron James's favorite young teammates early in his career. This draft also marked a historic first. Satnam Singh, selected 52nd by the Dallas Mavericks, became the first player born in India ever drafted into the NBA, though he never actually appeared in an NBA game. Interestingly, this class also had a notable number of undrafted players who carved out real careers. Royce O'Neal became a long-tenured 3-and-D contributor across multiple teams. Christian Wood had a rough stretch with the Lakers, but back in Houston, he was putting up roughly 20 points a game as an undrafted center, which is a genuinely impressive outcome. Quinn Cook, a two-time NBA champion and a career 40% three-point shooter, also went undrafted, and it's a little surprising his career wound down as early as it did, given how solid he looked as a depth piece in Golden State. And of course, fan favorite T.J. McConnell is one of the most distinctive point guards of his era. I'd argue that among backup point guards league-wide, he's one of the most consistently productive players we've seen. So, there you have it. An iconic draft class, remembered as much for its busts and underachievers at the top as for anything else. Did you expect that half of the 14 lottery picks would be out of the league by age 29, most of them before ever truly reaching their prime? Looking back now, knowing how all these careers actually played out, what's your take on this class overall? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.